When I found a wedding dress in my husband's closet, wasn't my size, then I learned who it was for. Hi everyone! Before we get into today's video, I need your help. We've noticed that the channel's reach has been dropping a bit, and one of the best ways you can support us is by subscribing. It's quick, free, and helps us keep bringing you new and interesting stories. Your support means the world to us, and together we can grow this channel. Thank you so much. Now let's get to today's story. I'm writing from a temporary account for obvious reasons, and I've changed some details to protect my anonymity. I should have known something was wrong when David stopped leaving his coffee mug on the nightstand. It's funny how the smallest details can unravel everything you thought you knew about your life. For 12 years, that ceramic mug with the faded university logo had been my morning alarm clock. The gentle clink as he set it down after his first sip, always at exactly 6:47 a.m. But 3 months ago, the clinking stopped. Looking back now, I can trace the fault lines that appeared in our marriage like cracks in a foundation. They started small, almost imperceptible, the way a marriage slowly suffocates rather than dramatically explodes. David began working late more frequently, his explanations growing vaguer by the week. "Client dinner," he'd say, loosening his tie as he slipped into bed beside me at nearly midnight. "Big project deadline. Team-building event." The excuses multiplied like cancer cells, each one seemingly innocent on its own, but collectively forming something malignant. We met at a bookstore, of all places. How wonderfully cliché that seems now. The romantic meet-cute that I once cherished as proof that we were meant to be together. I was 26, reaching for a copy of 100 Years of Solitude on the top shelf, when this tall man, with kind eyes and an easy smile, appeared beside me. "Great choice," he said, effortlessly retrieving the book. "Though fair warning, you might want to keep a family tree handy while reading. Garcia Marquez doesn't make it easy to keep track of all the Aurelianos." I laughed, and something about the sound made him pause. Book still in hand, as if he was trying to memorize the moment. "I'm David," he said, extending his free hand. "Sarah." The handshake lingered just long enough to feel intentional. 3 hours later, we were still talking over coffee in the bookstore cafe, the conversation flowing like we'd known each other for years rather than minutes. He was an architect then, passionate about sustainable design and green buildings. His eyes lit up when he talked about creating spaces where families could thrive, where children could grow up surrounded by natural light and thoughtful design. I was working at a non-profit, coordinating programs for at-risk youth, and he listened to my stories with genuine interest, asking questions that showed he actually cared about the answers. Our first date was a picnic in Meridian Hill Park, where he'd prepared sandwiches with the crusts cut off, because I'd mentioned in passing that I'd never liked them. Such a small gesture, but it told me he listened, that details mattered to him. We talked about everything, our childhoods, our dreams, our fears. He told me about his younger sister Emma, who died in a car accident when she was 19. The pain in his voice when he spoke about her was raw, immediate, and I found myself wanting to take that hurt away from him. "She would have loved you," he said quietly, his fingers finding mine in the grass. "She always said I needed someone who could make me laugh without trying." The early years of our marriage were everything I'd dreamed they would be. David would surprise me with small gifts, not expensive things, but thoughtful ones. A pressed flower from our first date, preserved in a frame. A signed copy of Garcia Marquez's Love in the Time of Cholera for our first anniversary. A small ceramic owl for my desk, because I'd once mentioned loving how wise they looked. We had our routines, our private jokes, our shared language that couples develop over time. Sunday morning pancakes while reading the paper aloud to each other. Friday night movies on the couch, taking turns picking the film. The way he'd always warm my side of the bed before I got in during winter months. How he'd leave little notes in my lunch bag when he knew I had a difficult day ahead. "You've got this, beautiful. Can't wait to hear how you conquered the world today." D. Those notes are probably still somewhere in my desk drawer at work. Faded reminders of when my husband was a man who noticed things, who cared about the small moments that make up a marriage. But marriages aren't built on grand gestures. They're constructed from thousands of tiny interactions, and somewhere along the way, ours began to change. The shift was so gradual, I almost didn't notice it. The notes stopped appearing in my lunch. The Sunday pancakes became rushed affairs. David checking his phone, while I read the news aloud to what felt like an empty room. The movie nights grew less frequent, replaced by his need to catch up on work or review some blueprints. I told myself it was normal. Marriages evolve, passion settles into companionship, the butterflies make room for deeper, steadier love. Except this didn't feel like settling. It felt like withdrawal. David wasn't becoming more comfortable with me. He was becoming more distant. The late nights at the office increased. 2 nights a week became 3, then 4. When I'd call his office after 8 p.m., the receptionist would tell me everyone had left hours ago. When I asked David about it, he'd explain that he was working at the construction sites now, doing final inspections, meeting with contractors after regular business hours. "The Martinez project is behind schedule," he'd say, not meeting my eyes. "I need to be hands-on if we're going to make the deadline." I wanted to believe him. Marriage, I'd learned, requires a certain level of faith. Faith that your partner is who they say they are, that their explanations make sense, that the person you fell in love with is still there beneath the surface changes. But faith becomes harder to maintain when the evidence starts pointing in different directions. His phone, which had always been casually accessible, suddenly required a passcode. "Work security requirements," he explained when I asked about it. "New client confidentiality protocols." His laptop, once a shared device we'd both used for everything from online shopping to vacation planning, became off. Limits. "Too much sensitive client information on there now," he said, physically moving it away from me when I reached for it one evening. The credit card statements began showing charges I didn't recognize. Expensive dinners at restaurants we'd never been to together. Purchases from boutiques I'd never heard of. When I asked about them, David always had explanations. Client meals, gifts for his business partner's wife, contributions to office celebrations. Each answer was plausible on its own, but together they formed a pattern that made my stomach clench with something I didn't want to name. 3 months ago, around the time the morning coffee ritual ended, David started going to the gym. This might sound unremarkable, except that my husband has spent our entire relationship claiming that his idea of exercise was walking to the mailbox. Suddenly, he was leaving the house at 5:30 a.m. for morning workouts, coming home energized and showered, talking about personal trainers and fitness goals. "It's never too late to get in shape," he'd say, flexing his arms playfully in the bathroom mirror. But when I suggested joining his gym, maybe working out together, he quickly dismissed the idea. "It's a very small place, mostly guys from work. You wouldn't like it." I began to feel like I was living with a stranger who happened to look like my husband. The man who used to ask about my day with genuine interest now gave distracted nods while scrolling through his phone. The man who used to reach for my hand during movies now sat on the opposite end of the couch, claiming he needed space to really focus on the film. The man who used to surprise me with thoughtful gifts now forgot our monthly dinner date 3 times in a row. "I'm sorry, Sarah, this project is consuming everything. Once the Martinez building is finished, things will go back to normal." But what if this was the new normal? What if the man I'd married, the man who cut crusts off sandwiches and left love notes in lunch bags, what if that man was gone forever? The doubt crept in slowly, then all at once. I found myself analyzing every conversation, looking for inconsistencies in his stories. I started paying attention to how he smelled when he came home, not just checking for perfume, though that thought occurred to me, but noticing that his usual scent of sawdust and coffee had been replaced by something I couldn't identify, something floral and expensive. I began doing things I'd never imagined I'd do. Checking his pockets before doing laundry, looking at his phone when he left it unattended, though the passcode kept me locked out. Driving by his office on evenings when he claimed to be working late, only to find the parking lot empty and the building dark. The worst part wasn't the growing suspicion. It was the way it changed me. I'd always prided myself on being trusting, on giving people the benefit of the doubt. But David's behavior was turning me into someone I didn't recognize. Suspicious, paranoid, constantly second-guessing everything he said. I hated what I was becoming, but I couldn't seem to stop myself from searching for clues that would either confirm my fears or put them to rest. That's how I found myself in David's closet on a Tuesday afternoon in early September, looking for his navy suit that I planned to have dry cleaned as a surprise. He'd mentioned having an important client presentation at the end of the week, and I thought this small gesture might be a way to reconnect, to show him that I was still paying attention to his needs. David had always been particular about his closet organization. suits arranged by color, shirts hung according to sleeve length, ties rolled and stored in a special drawer organizer. But lately, even his organizational system seemed to be changing. Clothes were shoved in haphazardly, expensive shirts wrinkled and pushed to one side, as if he was making room for something else. I was reaching for the navy suit when my hand brushed against something unexpected. Plastic garment bags pushed far back into the corner, hidden behind his winter coats. At first, I assumed it was more of his clothing, perhaps suits he was having altered or storing for a different season. But the shape was wrong, too wide and too long to be any of his usual attire. Curiosity won over, respect for privacy. I pushed aside the winter coats and pulled the first garment bag forward, unzipping it carefully. What I found inside made my breath catch in my throat. It was a wedding dress. Not just any wedding dress, but the kind of gown that cost more than most people's monthly salary. The fabric was exquisite. Layers of ivory silk and delicate lace, with tiny pearls sewn into intricate patterns along the bodice. The skirt was full and dramatic, the kind that would require a cathedral-length train and at least 2 people to help the bride walk down the aisle. For a moment, my mind scrambled to make sense of what I was seeing. My first thought was that this had to be some kind of surprise. Maybe David was planning to renew our vows. Maybe this was his way of recreating the wedding we'd never had the budget for when we were young. My heart actually leapt at the possibility, and I felt foolish for all my recent suspicions. But then, reality crashed over me like cold water. This dress wasn't my size. It wasn't even close. I wore a size 8, had worn a size 8 for the past 5 years, ever since I'd lost the 15 pounds I'd gained during my late 20s. David knew my size intimately. He'd bought me clothes before, always getting it exactly right. This dress was clearly a size 4, maybe even a 2, the kind of size that belonged on someone petite and delicate, someone with the kind of figure I'd never had even in my thinnest moments. My hands began to shake as I held the dress up, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The price tag was still attached, $3,200, from a boutique I'd never heard of in Georgetown. The receipt, tucked into a small pocket in the garment bag, was dated just 2 weeks ago. 2 weeks ago, when David had claimed to be working late on the Martinez project. I opened the second garment bag with trembling fingers, though part of me already knew what I would find. Shoes, size 6.5 Jimmy Choo pumps in ivory silk, still in their original box. A delicate veil with hand-sewn pearls that matched the dress perfectly. Everything a bride would need for her perfect day. Everything except a bride who was married to my husband. I sank onto David's side of the bed, the dress spread across my lap, my mind racing through possibilities that I didn't want to consider. Maybe this was for a client's daughter? Maybe David had been asked to help with wedding planning for someone at work? Maybe there was a perfectly reasonable explanation that I was too panicked to see clearly. But even as I tried to rationalize what I'd found, other pieces began falling into place. The mysterious charges on our credit card. They weren't just for client dinners. They were for jewelry, for flowers, for a dress that cost more than we'd spent on our entire wedding. The late night, the new cologne, the sudden interest in fitness, it all made horrible, perfect sense. David wasn't just having an affair. He was planning to marry someone else. The thought hit me like a physical blow, leaving me gasping and nauseous. I ran to the bathroom and dry-heaved over the toilet, my body rejecting the reality that my mind was being forced to accept. When the wave of sickness passed, I splashed cold water on my face and looked at myself in the mirror. The woman staring back at me looked hollow, shocked, like someone who'd just witnessed an accident. How long had this been going on? How long had David been living a double life, planning a future with another woman while sharing a bed with me? How long had I been playing the role of the unsuspecting wife, while he prepared to leave me behind? I forced myself to go back to the closet, to document what I'd found. I took pictures with my phone, the dress, the shoes, the receipt, everything. My hands were steadier now, operating on some kind of autopilot while my mind reeled. Evidence. I needed evidence because this was going to become a legal matter, wasn't it? Divorce proceedings, division of assets, the dissolution of 12 years of marriage. As I was photographing the receipt, I noticed something else, a small card tucked behind the price tag. In David's handwriting it read, "For my Emma girl, you're going to be the most beautiful bride." All my love, D. Emma girl. The name hit me like a slap. Emma was David's sister, the one who died in the car accident when she was 19. He told me about her on our first date, had carried that grief with him throughout our entire relationship. I'd learned to navigate around his pain, to understand that certain dates, her birthday, the anniversary of the accident, would always be difficult for him. But Emma had been dead for 15 years. She couldn't be getting married, she couldn't be wearing this dress, unless... A new possibility crept into my mind, one that was somehow both better and worse than infidelity. What if the woman David was planning to marry was named Emma? What if he'd found someone who shared his dead sister's name, and in his grief-addled mind, this had become something significant? What if this wasn't just about another woman, but about some twisted attempt to recapture what he'd lost? I needed to know more. I needed to understand who Emma was, where David had met her, how long this had been going on. But I also needed to be smart about this. If I confronted David now, while I was emotional and scattered, he would have time to come up with explanations, to manipulate the situation. I needed to gather more information first. The next 2 weeks were the most difficult of my life. I had to pretend that everything was normal, while conducting what felt like a surveillance operation on my own husband. I smiled and made dinner, and asked about his day, all while internally cataloguing every late night, every unexplained absence, every inconsistency in his stories. I became a detective of my own marriage. I memorized his schedule, noting patterns in when he was home and when he wasn't. I started checking the mileage on his car, documenting that he was driving far more than his claimed work activities would require. I opened a separate bank account and began moving small amounts of money, preparing for the financial independence I might need. Most importantly, I started looking for Emma. It's remarkable what you can learn about someone when you're motivated by heartbreak and fury. I started with David's social media accounts, though he'd never been particularly active online. His Facebook page was mostly work-related posts and photos of buildings his firm had designed. But I noticed that his friends list had grown significantly in recent months, and I began methodically going through the new additions. That's when I found her, Emma Castellanos, 28 years old, a marketing coordinator at a tech startup downtown. Her profile picture showed a petite brunette with bright eyes and a radiant smile, exactly the type of woman who would wear a size 4 wedding dress. She was beautiful in that effortless way that made me immediately conscious of my own 38-year-old face, with its laugh lines and the small scar on my chin from a childhood bicycle accident. Her Facebook page was a catalogue of the life David had apparently been sharing with her. Check-ins at restaurants I recognized from our credit card statements, photos from hiking trails that David had claimed to be visiting alone for stress relief, pictures of flowers that looked suspiciously similar to charges I'd seen from a Georgetown florist. But it was the more recent posts that made my blood run cold. Photos of her left hand, showing off a diamond engagement ring that had cost exactly $4,800, according to a charge I'd questioned just last month. David had claimed it was a bonus payment to a contractor, but apparently it had been used to purchase a 2-carat princess-cut diamond for his fiancée. His fiancée? The word felt foreign and sharp, like broken glass in my mouth. The timeline became clear as I scrolled through months of posts. David and Emma had been together for at least 8 months, possibly longer. The relationship had progressed quickly, from casual dating to serious commitment. She'd posted photos from weekend trips that coincided perfectly with David's claimed work conferences. She'd shared pictures of romantic dinners that matched the mysterious restaurant charges on our credit cards. And now she was planning a wedding. Their wedding. While still legally married to me, I found the wedding planning posts from 2 weeks ago. Excited updates about finding the perfect dress and shoes to match. Photos of venue options, all of them expensive locations that would require significant deposits. She'd even created a private wedding planning group on Facebook, though I couldn't access the details without being added as a friend. The most painful part was seeing how happy she looked. In every photo, Emma was glowing with the kind of joy that I remembered feeling in the early days of my relationship with David. She looked like a woman in love, like someone who believed she was planning the most important day of her life with a man who was completely devoted to her. She had no idea that David was already married. She had no idea that he went home to me every night, that he shared a bed with another woman, that their entire relationship was built on a foundation of lies. Or maybe she did know, and simply didn't care. The thought made me sick, but I had to consider it. Maybe Emma knew exactly what she was getting into. Maybe she was the type of woman who pursued married men, who got some kind of thrill from stealing someone else's husband. Maybe this was all part of some elaborate plan to destroy my marriage and claim David for herself. But looking at her photos, at the genuine happiness in her eyes, I didn't think so. Emma looked like a woman who believed she was in love with a single, available man who was ready to commit his life to her. She looked like someone who had no idea she was about to become the other woman in someone else's divorce story. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. The confrontation came on a Thursday evening in late September. David had texted that afternoon to say he'd be working late again. Client dinner with the Martinez team. But I'd already confirmed through my detective work that Emma had posted about a romantic dinner reservation at Le Bernardin, the same restaurant where David and I had celebrated our 5th wedding anniversary. I waited until 10 p.m., then called his cell phone. It went straight to voicemail, which wasn't surprising. What was surprising was that when I called the restaurant directly and asked to speak with David Mitchell at the Martinez party reservation, I was told there was no reservation under that name, because he was there with Emma, not with any client named Martinez. That's when I decided I was done with surveillance and ready for confrontation. I knew David would be home by 11:30. That had become his pattern on these work dinner nights. So I prepared. I gathered all the evidence I'd collected over the past 2 weeks. The photos of the wedding dress, screenshots of Emma's social media posts, copies of credit card statements with highlighted charges, a timeline I'd created documenting David's lies and inconsistencies. Then I sat in our living room and waited. He came through the front door at 11:47 p.m., looking relaxed and happy, in a way that I hadn't seen in months. His hair was slightly messed up, his tie loosened, and he was humming under his breath. He looked like a man who'd just spent the evening with someone who made him feel young and desired. He looked like a man in love. Just not with his wife. "Hey, babe," he said, dropping his keys on the hall table and heading toward the stairs. "Sorry I'm so late. The Martinez dinner ran longer than expected, and then we had to—" "Stop," I said quietly. Something in my voice made him pause at the bottom of the stairs and turn around. That's when he saw me sitting in the living room, with documents spread across the coffee table, and the expression on his face shifted from casual contentment to something that looked like fear. "Sarah, what's all this?" I held up one of the photos I'd taken of the wedding dress. "Why don't you tell me about Emma?" The color drained from his face so quickly I thought he might faint. He stood frozen for what felt like several minutes, his mouth opening and closing without any sound coming out. I'd seen David handle pressure before, difficult clients, construction delays, family emergencies, but I'd never seen him look completely helpless. "I can explain," he finally managed, his voice barely above a whisper. "Please do," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "And while you're at it, maybe you can explain why you're planning to marry her while you're still married to me." David moved slowly into the living room, as if approaching a dangerous animal. He sat down in the chair across from me, careful not to get too close, and I could see his hands shaking. "It's not what you think," he began, then stopped himself. "Actually, no, that's not true. It's exactly what you think, and I don't know how to explain it in a way that doesn't make me sound like a complete monster." At least he was being honest. That was something. "Try me," I said. David was quiet for a long time, staring at his hands. When he finally spoke, his voice was thick with something that might have been regret. "I met Emma at a coffee shop downtown 8 months ago. She was reading Garcia Marquez, the same book you were reaching for when we met. It felt like some kind of sign, you know. And when she told me her name was Emma..." He trailed off, but I knew where this was going. "You thought it was your sister somehow coming back to you. I know how that sounds. I know it's crazy. But Sarah, when she smiled at me, for just a moment, it was like Emma was there again. My sister. Like she was giving me permission to be happy again." "You were already happy," I said, and I could hear the hurt in my own voice. "We were happy, or at least I thought we were." "We were," David said quickly. "We are. That's what makes this so complicated." "No, David. What makes this complicated is that you're planning to marry another woman while you're married to me. What makes this complicated is that you've been lying to me for 8 months, spending our money on another woman, making me feel crazy for noticing that you'd changed." "I never meant for it to go this far," he said. "At first it was just coffee, just talking." She reminded me so much of Emma, not just the name, but her laugh, the way she gets excited about little things. It felt like having a piece of my sister back. "So this is grief counseling? You're working through your issues by having an affair?" "It started as friendship," David insisted. "But then, I don't know, Sarah. Being with her made me remember who I used to be. Before responsibility and mortgages and routine made everything feel so heavy. With Emma, I felt young again. I felt like anything was possible. And I made you feel old and trapped. No, that's not." He rubbed his face with both hands. "You didn't do anything wrong. This is all on me. But Sarah, we've been married for 12 years. We've settled into this comfortable routine, and sometimes I wondered if we were still together out of habit rather than love." The words hit me like physical blows. "So you decided to find out by starting a relationship with someone else?" I told myself it was harmless, just a friendship with someone who reminded me of Emma. But then she asked me about my family, and I don't know why I did this, but I told her I wasn't married. I told her I'd been engaged once, but it didn't work out. You erased me. You erased our entire marriage. Once I'd lied about being single, I couldn't take it back without admitting that I'd been lying from the beginning. And the more time I spent with her, the more I realized how much I'd missed, feeling that spark, that excitement of getting to know someone new. "So you decided to marry her?" David was quiet for a long moment. She started talking about the future, about wanting to find someone to settle down with. And I realized that I wanted to be that someone. Not because I don't love you, Sarah, but because being with her reminded me what it feels like to be chosen rather than just settled for. "I chose you every single day for 12 years, I said, and my voice was getting louder, despite my efforts to stay calm. "I chose you when you were struggling to get your business off the ground. I chose you when your father died, and you couldn't get out of bed for 3 weeks. I chose you when we had that miscarriage, and you blamed me for not being able to carry a pregnancy to term. I chose you through everything, David, and you decided that wasn't enough." He was crying now, which somehow made me angrier rather than sympathetic. I know how much you've given up for me, for us. That's part of what made this so hard. How do you leave someone who's been nothing but good to you?" "Apparently, you don't leave them. You just start planning a wedding with someone else and hope they don't find out." "I was going to tell you," he said. "I've been trying to figure out how to do this without destroying everyone's lives." "When?" I demanded. "When were you going to tell me? Before or after you said I do to Emma?" "I don't know," he admitted. "I kept thinking maybe I could find a way to end things with Emma without hurting her, go back to the way things were with us. But then she started talking about marriage, and I realized I didn't want to end things with her. You wanted to have your cake and eat it too?" "I wanted to not have to choose," he said quietly. "I wanted to find a way to keep both lives." The sheer selfishness of it took my breath away. He'd been planning to maintain our marriage while building a new one with Emma, as if the rest of us were just characters in his personal fantasy, rather than real people with our own lives and feelings. "Well, congratulations, David. You don't get to keep both lives. You don't get to have me as your safety net, while you explore what it's like to be young and in love with someone else." I stood up and began gathering the documents I'd spread across the coffee table. "I'm filing for divorce. I've already spoken to a lawyer, and I've opened my own bank account. You can keep planning your wedding to Emma, but you're going to do it as a divorced man." "Sarah, wait. Can't we talk about this? Can't we try counseling or—" "Talk about what, David? About how you spent 8 months lying to me? About how you used our money to buy an engagement ring for another woman? About how you let me think I was going crazy when I noticed you pulling away?" I was shouting now. 12 years of trust and love, curdling into rage and betrayal. "You want to know what the worst part is? It's not even that you fell in love with someone else. People fall out of love. Marriages end. I could have understood that. The worst part is that you turned me into a fool. You made me doubt my own instincts, question my own sanity, while you were planning a whole new life behind my back. I never wanted to hurt you, but you did hurt me, and you hurt Emma too, because she doesn't even know she's planning a wedding with a married man. She thinks she's found her soulmate, and instead she's going to find out she's been dating a liar who was too cowardly to end his first marriage before starting his second one." David looked like he was going to be sick. Are you going to tell her? I don't know yet, I said honestly. Part of me thinks she deserves to know what kind of man she's planning to marry. Part of me thinks she's going to find out soon enough when divorce papers start getting filed. I headed toward the stairs, then turned back to look at him one more time. I loved you, David. I loved you enough to build a whole life around you, to make your dreams my dreams, to choose you over and over again even when things got hard. And you threw that away for someone who reminds you of your dead sister and makes you feel 25 again. Sarah, I'll be staying at my sister's for the next few weeks while I figure out what comes next. I suggest you use that time to decide whether you're going to tell Emma the truth yourself or whether you'd rather she hear it from my divorce attorney. I walked up the stairs without looking back, packed a bag with essentials, and left the house that had been our home for 8 years. As I drove to my sister's place at midnight, I felt something I hadn't expected. Relief. For months, I'd been living with a gnawing sense that something was wrong, that I was missing some crucial piece of information about my own life. Now I knew what that piece was. David had been living a double life, and I'd been an unwitting participant in his deception. The truth hurt. God, it hurt more than I'd imagined possible. But at least now, I knew I wasn't crazy. The next few weeks passed in a blur of legal consultations, document gathering, and difficult conversations with friends and family. I hired Rebecca Chen, a divorce attorney who came highly recommended for her expertise in cases involving hidden assets and infidelity. Rebecca was thorough, methodical, and completely unsympathetic to David's situation. Men like your husband think they're entitled to have multiple lives, she told me during our first meeting. They want the security of marriage and the excitement of an affair, and they convince themselves they can have both without consequences. My job is to make sure there are consequences. Rebecca helped me document everything: the secret wedding expenses, the lies about working late, the evidence of David's relationship with Emma. We discovered that David had been even more deceptive than I'd realized. He'd opened a separate credit card account to pay for some of his expenses with Emma, and he'd been skimming money from our joint savings account for months to fund his double life. This is good for us, Rebecca said, reviewing bank statements. Courts don't look kindly on spouses who hide assets or use marital funds for extramarital affairs. We can use this to argue for a more favorable settlement. But as satisfying as it was to know that David would face financial consequences for his actions, what I really wanted was something that no court could give me. I wanted him to understand the depth of what he'd destroyed. I wanted him to feel the same sense of betrayal and humiliation that I'd been carrying for months. I wanted him to realize that his actions had consequences beyond just splitting up assets. That's when I decided to tell Emma myself. I know it sounds vindictive, and maybe it was, but I also genuinely believe she deserved to know the truth about the man she was planning to marry. She deserved to make an informed decision about whether David was the kind of person she wanted to build a life with. I found Emma at the Starbucks where she worked most mornings, according to her social media posts. She was exactly as beautiful as her photos suggested, but smaller somehow, more delicate. She was typing on her laptop with intense concentration, a half-empty coffee cup and a chocolate croissant on the table beside her. "Emma," I said, approaching her table carefully. "Emma Castellanos?" She looked up with a friendly smile that faltered when she saw my expression. "Yes." "Do we know each other?" "Not exactly. My name is Sarah Mitchell. I think we need to talk." The recognition didn't hit her immediately. She still looked puzzled but not alarmed. "Mitchell? That name sounds familiar. Are you in marketing?" "No," I said, sitting down across from her without being invited. "I'm David's wife." The change in her expression was instantaneous and devastating. The color drained from her face, her hands went still on the keyboard, and her mouth opened in a small, shocked "oh" that barely made any sound. "His wife?" she repeated as if the words didn't make sense. "His wife of 12 years, I confirmed. The wife he forgot to mention when he started dating you 8 months ago. Emma stared at me for what felt like an eternity, her mind clearly racing to process this information. I could see her reviewing conversations, reconsidering things David had said, trying to reconcile the man she thought she knew with this new reality. "He's not married," she said finally, but her voice was uncertain. "He told me he was engaged once, but it didn't work out. He's never been married." "He lied to you?" I said gently. "He's been lying to both of us." I pulled out my phone and showed her photos. Pictures of David and me from our wedding day, recent photos of us at family gatherings, documentation of our shared life that he'd apparently erased from his version of his history. Emma looked at each photo carefully, and I watched her expression change from disbelief to horror to something that looked like grief. "Oh my God," she whispered. "Oh my God, I'm the other woman." "You didn't know," I said, and I found myself feeling genuinely sorry for her. "He made sure you didn't know?" Emma was crying now, quiet tears that she wiped away with the back of her hand. "The wedding dress," she said suddenly. "We bought a wedding dress 2 weeks ago. He said he wanted to surprise me, that he'd take care of all the details. I thought it was romantic." "He hid it in our closet," I told her. "That's how I found out about you." She put her head in her hands. "I can't believe this is happening. I thought I'd finally found someone who wanted to build a real life with me, someone honest and stable and ready for commitment." "David can be very convincing when he wants something," I said. "He convinced me to marry him 12 years ago, and he convinced me for months that I was imagining things when I suspected he was having an affair." Emma looked up at me, her eyes red and swollen. "What are you going to do?" "I'm divorcing him," I said simply. "I've already filed the papers. The question is, what are you going to do?" She was quiet for a long time, staring at her laptop screen without seeing it. "I don't know," she said finally. "I don't know who he really is anymore. If he could lie about something this fundamental, what else has he lied about?" "That's a question you'll have to ask yourself," I said. "But Emma, you should know that he told me he loved you because you reminded him of his dead sister. He said your name was a sign, that being with you was like having her back." The look of pain that crossed her face was so intense, I almost regretted telling her. But she needed to know all of it. She needed to understand that David's feelings for her weren't just about her as an individual. They were tangled up in his unresolved grief and his desire to recapture something he'd lost years ago. "His sister?" she whispered. "Emma, she died when she was 19. He's been carrying that grief our entire marriage, and apparently he saw you as some kind of replacement for her." Emma stood up abruptly, closing her laptop and gathering her things. "I can't. I need to process this. I need to think." "Emma, wait," I called after her. "I know this is awful, but you should also know. David isn't a monster. He's a man who made terrible choices, but he's not evil. If you decide to forgive him, if you decide you want to try to work through this..." She turned back to me, her expression unreadable. "Would you? If you were in my position, would you try to work through it?" The question caught me off guard. Would I? If I were 28 and in love with a man who had lied about his marital status, would I be willing to fight for the relationship? "I don't know," I said honestly. "But I do know that if you decide to walk away, you're not giving up on love. You're just giving up on a love that was built on lies." Emma nodded once, then walked out of the coffee shop without looking back. That was 3 weeks ago. Since then, my life has become a strange mix of legal proceedings and personal liberation. Rebecca is handling the divorce with ruthless efficiency, and it looks like I'll walk away with far more than half of our assets, thanks to David's financial deceptions. The house will have to be sold, but that's fine with me. I don't want to live in a place where I spent months feeling crazy and suspicious. David has tried to contact me dozens of times. Phone calls, texts, emails, even showing up at my sister's house to try to talk to me in person. I've ignored most of his attempts, but I did read one long email he sent last week. It was full of apologies and explanations, promises that he would end things with Emma, pleas for another chance to make our marriage work. "I realize now that I never appreciated what we had," he wrote. "I got so caught up in chasing something new and exciting that I forgot about the real love we built together. Emma was a fantasy, but you're real. Our life together is real. Please don't throw away 12 years because I was stupid enough to think the grass was greener somewhere else." But that's exactly the problem. He did think the grass was greener, and instead of talking to me about his feelings, instead of working on our marriage or asking for a divorce, he decided to cultivate a whole new lawn while keeping the old one as backup. I don't know what happened between David and Emma after our coffee shop conversation. Her social media accounts went private the day after we met, and David hasn't mentioned her in any of his attempts to contact me. I assume the engagement is off, though I can't be sure. Maybe she decided to forgive him. Maybe she decided that a man who would lie about being married was still worth fighting for. Or maybe she did what I did. Maybe she realized that love built on lies isn't really love at all. What I do know is that I'm not the same woman who found that wedding dress in the closet 6 weeks ago. That woman was desperate to save her marriage, to find explanations that would allow her to keep believing in the life she'd built. She was willing to doubt her own instincts, rather than face the possibility that her husband was betraying her. This woman, the woman I'm becoming, isn't interested in saving something that was already broken. She's interested in building something new and honest, even if that means building it alone. I've been thinking a lot about the early days of my relationship with David, about that first conversation in the bookstore when he helped me reach Garcia Marquez on the high shelf. I was reading 100 Years of Solitude then, a book about families trapped in cycles of repetition, making the same mistakes over and over again across generations. But there's another Garcia Marquez book that feels more relevant to my life now, Love in the Time of Cholera, which David gave me for our first anniversary. It's about a woman who spends most of her life married to a man she respects but doesn't truly love, while the man who genuinely adores her waits for her to become available again. In the end, when her husband dies, she's finally free to choose love over security, passion over comfort. I used to think that book was romantic. Now I think it's about second chances and the courage to start over when the life you've been living isn't the one you actually want. Yesterday, I signed the final divorce papers. Rebecca says it should be finalized within 60 days, which means I'll be legally single by Christmas. The house sold faster than expected, and after splitting the proceeds with David, I'll have enough money to start over wherever I want to go. I'm thinking about Seattle. I've never lived anywhere with mountains and water, and something about the idea of rain and coffee shops and a city where nobody knows my story appeals to me. I could get a job with a non-profit there, maybe go back to working with at-risk youth like I did before David and I got married. I could remember who I was before I became half of a couple, before my identity became so wrapped up in being someone's wife. The funny thing is, I'm not angry anymore. For weeks, I was consumed with rage, at David for lying, at Emma for existing, at myself for not seeing the signs sooner. But anger is exhausting, and at some point, it transforms into something else. Not forgiveness, exactly, but a kind of acceptance that allows you to move forward. David made his choices, and now he has to live with the consequences. Emma made her choices too, whatever they were, and I'm making mine. 3 days ago, I went back to our house, my former house, to pick up the last of my belongings. David wasn't there, but I still had my key, and I wanted to see the place one more time before it officially belonged to someone else. The house felt smaller than I remembered, and strangely impersonal, like a hotel room that had been staged for sale. All of our shared belongings were gone. The photos from our trip to Italy, the ceramic owl David had given me for my desk, the pressed flower from our first date. Everything that had made the house feel like our home had been packed away or thrown out. But I wasn't there for nostalgia. I was there for closure. I went upstairs to David's closet, the place where this whole nightmare had started. The wedding dress was gone, of course, along with the shoes and the veil. I wondered if David had returned them to the store, or if he'd given them to Emma despite everything, or if they were sitting in some storage unit somewhere, a 3200 reminder of the marriage that never happened. What I found instead was something I hadn't expected. A small box hidden behind David's winter coats, in the same spot where the wedding dress had been. Inside the box were letters, dozens of them, all addressed to Emma in David's handwriting. But these weren't love letters to his fiancée. They were letters to his dead sister. I sat on the floor of the empty closet and read through them, my heart breaking in a completely different way than it had when I discovered the affair. These letters spanned years. Some were dated from just after our wedding. Others were more recent. In them, David poured out his grief, his guilt about surviving when she hadn't, his fear that he was disappointing her memory by living such an ordinary life. "I think about you every day," one letter said. "I wonder what kind of person you would have become, who you would have married, what your children would have looked like. I try to live enough life for both of us, but I don't know if I'm doing it right." Another letter, dated 2 years ago. "Sarah and I have been trying to have a baby, but it's not working. The doctors say everything looks fine, But month after month, nothing happens. I keep thinking that maybe this is punishment for surviving when you didn't. Maybe I don't deserve to create new life when yours was cut so short. The most recent letter was dated 3 months ago, right around the time David had started pulling away from me. I met someone today who reminds me of you. Her name is Emma, and she has your smile. For the first time in 15 years, I felt like maybe you were trying to tell me something. Maybe you're not gone completely. Maybe you sent her to me. I cried reading those letters, not for my marriage, which was over, but for David, who had been carrying this crushing grief for so long that it had warped his ability to see reality clearly. He hadn't fallen in love with Emma the person. He'd fallen in love with what he thought she represented. A connection to his sister. A sign that Emma was still with him somehow. It didn't excuse what he'd done to me or to Emma, but it helped me understand that his betrayal wasn't really about us at all. It was about a 23-year-old man who had never properly grieved the loss of his sister, and a 38-year-old man who was still trying to make sense of that loss. I took the letters with me when I left the house, not because I wanted to keep them, but because I thought David should have them back. They were his grief, his pain, his attempt to maintain a connection with someone he'd lost. He deserved to have them, even if our marriage was ending. I mailed the box to his office with a simple note. These belong to you. I hope you find a way to grieve Emma properly instead of looking for her in other people. Sarah. I never heard back from him, but I didn't expect to. Tomorrow, I'm driving to Seattle to look at apartments. I've got 3 interviews lined up with nonprofits there, and one of them sounds particularly promising. They work with teenagers who've aged out of the foster care system, helping them transition to independent living. It's exactly the kind of work I used to love, before I got so caught up in being David's wife that I forgot about being Sarah. I'm scared, of course. I'm 38 years old, starting over in a city where I don't know anyone, ending a marriage that was supposed to last forever. But I'm also excited in a way I haven't been in years. For the first time since I found that wedding dress, I feel like I'm moving towards something instead of just away from something. Last week, I was cleaning out boxes of my old things when I found the copy of 100 Years of Solitude that David had helped me reach on our first date. I'd forgotten I still had it, forgotten about the man who had seemed so charming and thoughtful in that bookstore 12 years ago. I opened it to a random page and found this line. It is not true that people stop pursuing dreams because they grow old. They grow old because they stop pursuing dreams. I'm not old. I'm not even middle-aged, really. I have decades ahead of me to figure out who I want to be, what kind of life I want to build. I have time to pursue dreams I haven't even thought of yet. David chose to pursue his dreams through deception and betrayal, thinking he could have everything without giving up anything. Emma chose. Well, I still don't know what Emma chose, and I suppose that's not my business anymore. But I'm choosing something different. I'm choosing to start over with honesty, to build something new, instead of trying to resurrect something that was already dead. I'm choosing to trust my instincts instead of doubting them, to believe that I deserve better than a love built on lies. The wedding dress is gone, hidden away, or returned or thrown out, and I'm glad. It was never mine to begin with, not my size, not my style, not my future. It belonged to a fantasy, to a version of love that existed only in David's imagination. My real love story, the one where I choose myself, where I refuse to settle for scraps and deception, where I build a life based on truth instead of comfortable lies, that story is just beginning. And this time, I'm writing it myself.